Hey guys, welcome back. So today, we're working on this 1979 Puch Moped. This is the Magnum MK2 model, made in Austria, and it is powered by a two-stroke engine. This comes to us from a subscriber who actually got this from his grandfather. He was the original owner. My understanding is that he drove this for about 5 or 6 years, and then it went into storage 40 years ago. So this engine has not run in 40 years, but it was put away in running order. So I'm thinking it's not going to be too hard to get it running again. And just looking at it, it appears to be in very good shape. It was stored well. The tires even hold air. They don't show any signs of dry rot. And the chain surprisingly has no rust. The seat's in great shape. Brakes actually work. And according to the odometer, fairly low mileage at 913 miles. So yeah, this thing is practically brand new. That said though, it has been sitting for 4 decades, so I'm sure it's going to need a bit of work. So let's get it inside, up on the lift, and get going on this. So despite how clean this looks, I think my optimism earlier might have been misplaced because while rolling it in, I noticed the pedals were turning, the chain and the wheel were turning. I tried engaging the clutch, which should have rotated the engine, but yeah, it didn't. Let me show you. So like this, everything seems fine. I'm going to pull the lever that engages the engine, and it comes to a hard stop. So either it has really good compression or the engine's locked up. So let's get the plug out, see if that makes any difference. That plug is really tight. Ooh. It's loose. And actually spinning out fine, so that gives me hope. Maybe this has really good compression and isn't locked up from sitting for 40 years. No rust on the plug tip, so that is a good sign. Let's try to rotate the engine again. So like before, we're going to rotate it with the engine disengaged. And now I'm going to pull the clutch to engage the engine. Yep. I hear the engine turning over, so I don't want to do it too much. Let's get some oil in there, but that is a good sign. The engine, not locked up, apparently has really good compression. So we'll get some PB Blaster in there, and also some Marvel Mystery Oil. This engine hasn't seen oil in quite a long time, so give it a nice healthy dose. And then I want to turn the engine over at speed, just make sure that it's nice and smooth and we don't hear any funny noises. All right, so we're just going to start by pedaling this as a normal bike, and the clutch is right here to engage the engine. So let's pull that in. All right, the engine's turning over nice and smooth. Actually sounds really good. So I think we dodged a bullet on this one. So let's get the compression tester in there and see where it's at. All right, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get this gauge anywhere where it's going to stay. So we're starting at 0. We want to see at least 100, or else the engine's not going to run. So let's see what we get here. Nice. And according to the tester, we're at about 140 PSI. So that is more than enough for this engine to run. So we've got plenty of compression. You know, those numbers might be skewed a little bit due to the oil, but we have compression, the engine rotates. I guess the big question is, do we have spark? This is a point system, and likely the points need to be cleaned, but let's check. You know, potentially we have it. All right, so let's zoom you in a bit. And I'm gonna crank the engine. Keep an eye on the tip of the plug. Yeah, we've got good spark. Nice and consistent. So spark is not an issue. Compression's not an issue. Let's check fuel. So we'll get the plug back in. I don't think we need to have that out any longer. And to gain access to the carburetor, it's under this plastic shroud right here. You can just see the bowl right there. So for sure, we do need to pull these fasteners and get this piece out of the way. This is also oil injected. Oil pump is right there, and the lines are connected to it. But I don't think it was used because on the oil tank where the sight glass is, there is a message there about mixing 50-to-1. So I don't know if the pump failed or if the owner didn't trust the pump, but I think we'll pre-mix on this just to be safe. Yeah, it looks like the cover on the other side is held on separately. So we'll get that removed as well. In theory, this should be free, but it doesn't feel that way. There we go. All right, that one's already loose. I was going to say, I'm not sure the side's been off. The other side, you know, was kind of chewed up. But these look pretty pristine over here. That one was also loose. Okay, and we're in. Ooh, I don't know what that was. I think it's the cap for the transmission, but it just crumbled. There is fluid in here. I think it is ATF type F. So, you know, ideally I would get that cap off, but I think it's going to come off in pieces given what just happened. So I think I'm going to leave that alone for now. We are going to have to find a new one of those. There is a check bolt on the side, and potentially we could just use that to fill it too. I don't know if we need to mess with that cap on the top. So let's pull that out and see at least if the fluid level is at that point. Wow. Yeah, that hasn't been removed in a while, so we might need the impact for this. Yeah, that's not budging. Okay, good. So transmission is filled to the proper level, and the fluid color actually looks good. So, I did order up some new fluid. This isn't standard transmission fluid, it is type F. But the fact that we have some and that it's the right color, likely we can test with this without too much worry. Not sure what that is. Oh, okay. That's a tickler, I think. You push that down, it pushes the float down, allows more fuel into the carburetor. And that is just like a plastic cone that sits on top of there. We have a needle there. This is, I believe, the throttle cable running up. Not sure what that is. And the intake right here going into the engine, and the oil being injected right there. So this we're gonna have to look at more closely later. I do see some oil in the line. If the pump's not being used, this port needs to be plugged. Otherwise, it is a pretty big vacuum leak and it's gonna burn up the engine. But I think we can leave this stuff alone for now. So to get the carb off, probably need to pull the airbox. One screw right there, clamping it onto the intake. And we also need to remove the slide on the top. So let's start with the slide. Oh, good. That was not tight. And I haven't even looked in the tank yet. The fuel valve is off. And I'm thinking if this really hasn't been used since the mid-80s, likely this has never seen ethanol. So the carb shouldn't be that bad. And if the fuel was pre-mixed, there'll also be oil in the bowl, helping preserve the carburetor. At least that's my hope. Looks like there's a screw on the other side as well. All right, that looks good. We have a gasket there, which I don't want to damage. So let's get that out of the way. And we also have this piece that came out as well. So I think that actually is the choke mechanism. I'll have to take a closer look at that later to see how that works. So we'll get the airbox off next. And in theory, we should be free to come off. Although it's still pretty tight. Might not be able to take it off this way. The bowl is actually hitting the crankcase, so we can't slide it out any further. And it's really looking like we need to remove the whole intake manifold, which seems a little silly. If these wires weren't here, we could probably turn it. But yeah, I think we need to pull it from the intake. I'm just going to cut off this oil line. It is petrified, and we may not be using it anyway, but if we do, it needs to be replaced. Ah, we do have one more line. What is it? Not sure. It's a fuel line. That would be a good one to disconnect. So I didn't even see it. It's on the other side. Right there. And that line's also petrified. So I'm just going to cut it. We're going to have to run a new line, I think, regardless, up to the tank. And there we go. All right, so now we can separate these. And, you know, for the most part, we can set this aside. I'm going to probably just run the intake through the ultrasonic anyway. But we do need to remove this little piece of line that's still attached to the barb. Being that it's petrified, you know, sometimes they don't like coming off. But that one did. Let's try the same for the fuel line. Okay. So we are off to a good start. So first thing we're going to do is check this needle, see where it's set at right now. There's half, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, just a bit over 2.5. Okay, that's actually an air screw. A needle for fuel would be a very fine tip. Yeah, that one looks more like an air. And then just the bowl. 112, 322. Almost looks like a date. Anyway, let's get the bowl off. Interesting. So this is not a nut. This is actually part of the bowl. Either that or the nut is hopelessly stuck. But when I turn that, whole bowl spins off. Yeah. Not terrible, but not great. So there was likely fuel in here, and that has long since evaporated. Needle's not stuck, though. It does move, although the float sticks a little bit. Let's see if that pin will come out. Yeah, I might try the punch on that one. No. I'm not going to force it. We're going to let it soak first. See if the main jet will come out. Yep. And the emulsion tube, I'm not sure that one's going to come out. It might. No, we're going to leave that alone. So really the only issue here is that the pin, although it moved a little bit, you know, the center punch can't get in there. So, you know, I could try tapping that out, but if I break these ears, we're going to have a big problem. So I'm going to let it soak a bit before trying that again. Although I say that, and it makes me a little nervous leaving the needle in there because the neoprene or whatever material that's made out of sometimes can be damaged, you know, by the chemicals I use in the ultrasonic. But I think I'd rather risk that than actually physically damaging this carburetor. Let's try it the other way. And just moving the pin back and forth, that might be enough to free things up a bit. Let's add a little bit of penetrating oil. Yeah, it's slowly coming out. So close. There we go. Pin's actually damaged. Like it's not straight. Not sure if that comes through or not, but it's a little bit bent. So that's probably why it was hard to get out. Needle, though, looks to be pretty good, actually. And that's it. So pretty simple carb. Soak this for about 10 minutes and get it back together. So while we wait for that carb to clean up, I do want to get the rest of these off. You know, at a minimum, we need to replace the fuel line, potentially the oil line as well if it's still being used. And yeah, it looks like it is because we do have an oil tank with oil in it. So the carb cleaned up really well. And the bowl took a while. I ran that in there for a good half hour, but it did finally clean up. So, I don't think we're going to have too many issues here as long as this pin goes back in. I did try to straighten it, and I also sanded the burrs that I made with the pliers. So hopefully that goes in without too much trouble. So let's get this back together, starting with the main jet. And then the needle and float. The float I did submerge in the ultrasonic, and it did not take on any liquid, so I think the float is still good. Although it was a little sticky, so we're going to have to test that just to make sure that it doesn't hang up. Okay, pin went in. A lot easier than it came out. That's working well. Before we cleaned it, it was kind of getting stuck in the open position. So I think we're okay to get this closed up. And this is threaded. It's kind of unique. Haven't seen that before. And then lastly, the air screw. So we're going to lightly bottom that out. And then we'll back it up just about 2 turns. Technically a little bit over. I'm not sure if that's the correct setting for this carb, but we're going to set it back to where it was for the initial startup. All right, so we're bottomed out. There's half 1. Half 2, and a touch more. And that is more or less it. So the intake, we can fit that, but I'm going to leave it loose until we get everything situated, and then we'll tighten it down. So I'm thinking before we get the carb reinstalled, let's run a new line up to the tank. We cut that line. It is petrified. And it's been patched, it looks like a couple times in the past. So yeah, it could use a new line. We also have a crossover right here, which is equally petrified. So those should all be replaced. Before we pull the lines though, let's have a look in the tank, see what kind of condition it's in, and if there was any fuel left in that tank. Cap looks pretty good. And I see maybe a little rust. Maybe a tiny bit of liquid, but the tank actually looks to be pretty good. So I'm not too worried about that. But we will run a filter just in case. So hopefully I recorded taking this line off, but some fuel did come out. So we're just running this piece of Tygon. It's 3/16. A little bit snug, which is how you want it. And the purpose of this crossover is just to get every last bit of fuel, because the tank is actually shaped kind of in a C, sitting on top of a bar that's right here. So without this crossover, you're not going to get all the fuel out of the tank. And the fuel valve's on this side, so you have to transfer fuel over from the far side. in order to have access to it. And we're going to cut this old line off. Looks like there is fuel in there as well, so let's get maybe something to catch that fuel. Yeah, definitely petrified. So I'm going to get the valve out as well. I want to make sure that screen is clear. Usually there's a screen to keep the junk in the tank. Also want to make sure that the valve is not clogged. I guess technically we could probably open it, see if anything comes out. And the valve doesn't move. So actually, yeah, we're going to have to go through that valve. I don't want to break this. I think it's just a plastic handle. Thankfully, not too loose on there. So I'm guessing, you know, when this was stored, likely someone went to the effort to drain the tank, given that it was virtually empty. Yeah, not bad. Actually looks like a filter you'd see on a Honda valve on a generator. Yeah, I double checked. This is actually, it's a smaller diameter thread than what you'd find on like a generator tank. So I don't have anything to replace this with if it comes to that. You know, the seal in here doesn't look great. And I'm worried running that through the ultrasonic might destroy the seal. So the question is, how much force do we put on this piece of plastic? You know, the shaft actually moves a little. But that's it. So let's get this in the vise. Let's turn this fitting out. And I think that might be the path of least resistance here. Guess we'll see. Actually, I don't think we need the vise. This nut spins without issue, so that is a good sign. Let's see, now that we have it a little loose. Nope, still doesn't turn. Okay, so this is just a cap, really. So the valve is underneath, and that is the problem. So I'm going to get the rest of this line off. You know, the filter I'm going to leave where it is. I don't want to destroy what's left of that gasket. And maybe we can spray something up through here, or maybe use a pick or something and just get things cleaned out. And yeah, it's actually metal with a plastic cover. So good to know. You know, the valve itself is metal. And we got the petrified line off. Yeah, that doesn't move at all. So that little bit of play we had was just in the connection, you know, from this lever to the actual valve. And you can probably see there's a lot of junk in there. So I'm going to get a drill bit of the right size. We'll use that to kind of scoop out or pull out some of the junk. And we're only going to be able to go so far, but at least if we can get closer to the valve assembly, then, you know, if we get some penetrating oil in there or some carb cleaner, it at least has a chance of cleaning the affected area. Okay, actually it goes right in. So there was debris there, but it wasn't caked in. And we're going in pretty much to the valve body. So let's soak this down with some penetrating oil. And just try working that valve a little bit. Oh, it just moved. There we go. So the valve's open. Oh, actually, it's coming right out. So that is good. Actually, I didn't think that would pull apart. But now that it has come apart, you can see the problem. So that piece we can put through the ultrasonic. I mean, technically we can put this one through too. So I'm just going to spray through these passages with some penetrating oil. I want to see if they're all blocked. And no, that one seems good. That one doesn't seem to go anywhere. Let's try that one. And actually, none of them are blocked. So the passage on the left goes up, passage on the bottom goes down, and over here, I think that's just used to connect to the other passages. So yeah, the valve technically still works, but given the general condition of it, I'd be surprised if it actually shuts off properly. So the question is this varnish or rust? I think it's varnish. Really thick, heavy varnish. So the good news is I think it will clean up. Maybe. But we're going to have to soak that in the ultrasonic. So we might destroy the O-ring. It's kind of on its way out already. Yeah, I guess the question is, do I have another? I'm not sure. But I think we need to pull it apart and wash this properly to give it any chance of working. So yeah, we're going to have to soak this for quite a while to have any chance of using this valve again. You know, assuming I can find a replacement seal, although technically that one might still work. So yeah, let me get this soaking if we're going to have any chance of using it. And while this is cleaning up, you know, we'll get the fuel lines replaced, get the carb reinstalled, get everything, you know, as ready as we can. And then we'll circle back to this problem. And for this, we're going to use the regular simple green. Not safe for metal. It's likely going to etch it and turn it a different color, but it's a much better degreaser for, you know, the heavy caked on varnish that we're dealing with. And while we wait for that fuel valve to clean up, I want to replace the line from the oil tank down to the pump, and we'll do the same for the fuel line. So the oil that's in here, it's 40 years old. So I'm going to suck it out if I can, and that way we can switch the line without making a mess and start with some fresh oil. So we'll get this line off. Might have to cut it off. It's pretty petrified. Oh, it's coming off. And I'm sure this line is full of oil, so let's try to catch some of it. And yeah, not coming out very fast, so I guess we'll give that a second to drain. So we'll try a new piece of 3/16. Might be a little small. Nope, that is good. So we're going to cut this to size. I'm pretty sure this wrapped around kind of the outside of the intake manifold, which is not currently installed. So I want to leave it long enough to do that. So right there should be good. And we'll get this piece replaced as well. So this is the original clamp on here. It has to be cut off. And I'm going to leave that long for now. We'll cut it to size once everything's back together. And usually you can bleed these pumps out. I think that screw right there might be what we need. So I'm going to take that out and see if that purges the air. And no, we don't have any flow of oil coming from the tank. So yeah, maybe that's not what I thought it was. But we don't have any coming from that tank. So yeah, potentially something's clogged, although I say that, and when looking over here, I do see a little bit of oil now coming out where that bolt was. So let's give it a second, and maybe the system will purge. All right, I see the oil coming down now. So there was just a bit of oil still on the pump, but since that pushed out, the air can easily purge from the system. And you can see the oil is now advancing to the pump. So as soon as we get some of that oil coming out, we can get that screw back in place. All right, so the valve cleaned up pretty well. Not perfect, but I think it has a very good chance of working, whereas before it had no chance. So let's see if we can get this back together. And the orientation probably matters as far as, you know, how this piece goes in. So we have this C shape right here, and depending upon where it's positioned, it's either going to grab fuel from the main pickup or the reserve. So I'm going to put it in like that and hope for the best. And I guess the orientation doesn't matter because we can go 360 degrees around. So one position's off, one is kind of the main feed, and the other is the reserve. And there is no washer on this fitting, so I'm not sure if it's going to leak or not. You know, potentially there used to be a washer. Not sure. But yeah, still rotates. So we'll put the straw back in. I think that side right there. And then the filter goes on top. And actually, before I do that, let's put the seal back in. It's actually not as bad as I thought. It is still flexible. Not perfect, but I think it has a better chance of sealing than just putting like a standard O-ring in there. Yeah, I think that's it. So let's get it back on and try it out. So we get the gasket repositioned, and we'll get this back in place. Not the best angle that line comes in at. Wouldn't say it's pinched, but it is a hard corner. And I could see that easily becoming pinched if you don't pay attention. And In fact, there's a fair amount of spring pressure pushing the manifold out of place. All right, the oil line, I think, is going to be fine. You just got to make sure it's routed exactly right, or it is going to get pinched. But the manifold is tight. We still need to get the fuel line on, so let's get that cut to size and see if we can squeeze that in. Yeah, before we cut anything, though, let's get the lines routed 100% where they're going to be behind these plastics. And I am going to add an inline filter. Not a big fan of them, at least not paper ones, which is what I'm going to use. So I am going to install an inline paper filter, which not a great idea on a gravity-fed system, because as soon as the filter clogs up a little bit, there's not enough pressure to allow more fuel through. But in this case, even though we have a tank filter, the fuel valve still has a little debris in it that I'm sure is going to break loose. So I think we should run with this at least initially until we're sure that the junk is purged or caught by the filter. And finally, we can get the fuel line on. I already cut it to size. Just get it pushed down on the barb, get the clamp on, and we should be able to rotate this into the right position and finish up the carb install. Okay, I think we're good, at least as far as the fuel line goes in the intake manifold. So just clamp this back down. All right, so this is going to be a little bit hard. There might be an easier way to do this, but I'm not sure the way. So we need to get the choke plate on now, and it falls off real easy, but we can't do it after the fact because the gasket has to go on after the choke plate. So we need to get this all in as one piece without losing the choke in the process, or the gasket. Okay, we're in. Gasket, though, does have a little tear in it. So I don't know if that's going to be an issue. But we will find out. All right, so everything's back together. Choke seems functional. This here, too, I might have been wrong. I was thinking it might be an air set screw. But given we don't have any idle set screws anywhere, that could actually be for the idle. So if we need to adjust the idle, we'll try that. But that just means we don't have any way to fine-tune the mix, which I'm not sure I like the idea of that. But we are back together. And we're going to reuse this old filter. I believe you can pry this open to clean out the element. I think it's just a screen. But given the age of this, I don't think it's going to survive. So I did blow through it. There is no obstruction, no critter nest. I think it should be safe to reuse. I just mixed up a fresh batch of 50-to-1 using ethanol-free fuel. So the oil pump, even if it works, there is air in the line from the pump to the intake. So, the initial startup will be running off this 50-to-1 mix. And at some point when the pump has bled out the air, the mix is going to be closer to 25-to-1, which is pretty rich, but this bike hasn't run in 40 years, plus it's not my bike. Don't want to blow it up. At least not on the first start. And we're leaking. Not from where it connects to the tank, but actually this valve body right here where it screws in. So, yeah, I don't know if we're missing a washer, but that is a pretty big leak. So unless we can fix that, might have to run off the test tank. So I'm going to drain the tank down, take another look at this valve and see if we can fix that issue. So we've got this valve apart again. And there's nothing obviously wrong, but I think there is one thing missing here. I actually went back to the video and just double checked I didn't pull it out and just forget to put it back in. But now I'm thinking all that junk in there wasn't old fuel. I think that was the old gasket. And for comparison, I actually did try to fit this to the tank on the moped, and the threads, they're not right. This is coarse thread. I think the tank needs fine thread, but if you look in here on this Honda clone valve, you can see you have several holes like you do on this valve, and then on the back side you have a cutout, just like we do on the valve on the bike. But what we don't have is the seal in between. That's completely missing. So I was going to try to use this one, but it's just too wide in diameter. So what I'm going to do as a temporary fix is use an O-ring. Now, we're not going to be able to use reserve or regular, just everything's going to mix together. But the big thing that this is going to do is form a seal so that we're not leaking out through the threads. At least that's my hope. So we'll get this back together on the bike and see if that fixes our leak. So we got the valve reinstalled, although now it's more of just a fitting. So keep an eye on things down there. Hopefully the valve doesn't leak. Carburetor might be another story. If that starts leaking, we don't have a valve now to shut it off. All right, let's stop there and give it a minute. Yeah, we're still leaking at the valve, and even worse, we're now leaking at the carburetor. But let's tighten that up a little more. No. So I think we have to abandon the idea of using the tank for now. So I'm going to drain the tank again. Carb, I'm not too worried about yet. You know, I think once the engine runs, that needle will move around and potentially seat. At least that's my hope. All right, tank's been drained out, more or less. I did cap it off just in case any stray drips decide to come out. The carburetor, it is plumbed into external fuel, and the fuel valve, it's turned on, and the carburetor did stop flooding over. So let's try to start this for the first time in 40 years. All right, so what do you think? Is it going to start? I bet it will. Let's try. Wow. That was without choke. Of course, the engine's flooded, so we didn't really need choke. Hey, the headlight even works. All right, I will call that a success. Tank's leaking, so I'm gonna drain what little bit is in there left out, and we'll try this again. But that was a very good first start. Yeah, I think just the vibration of the bike running must have kicked up some fuel, because we were empty before we started. And we are mostly empty again. So let's start it again. All right, so let's try this again. There's no fuel coming out of the tank right now, but I think once the engine starts, you know, the vibration is causing what little is left to come out. So rather than fighting it, I just hooked up a line right to the pan. So that way at least it's not dripping on the engine. So let's try restarting it. Man, if it wasn't for that valve, we could take this for a ride right now. You know, it's starting real easy. Idle's perfect, revs out. The lights even work. You know, I didn't test the brake light, but yeah, everything seems to be working. Even the oil pump, you know, the oil is advancing into the intake manifold. So everything is working except for the valve. So I'm going to get one of those ordered up, and when it arrives, we'll get it installed, take this thing out for a ride. And it's a few days later. I've got the part that I think we need to fix this. Now, I didn't actually match the part number. I ordered just based off the description. This says it fits a Puch Magnum from 1978 to 1986. So theoretically, this will get us up and running. So let's try it out. Let's make sure the threads are the same. It was advertised as an M16 1.0 thread. And I don't think it's the right thread. No. Unfortunately, it's not going to work. And interestingly enough, the threads on here do seem to be a 1.0 pitch. So maybe they're just a bit dirty. I'm going to clean this up a bit, and we'll try that nut again. Whatever it is, it's not an M16, or maybe they sent me the M15. No, 16 millimeter by 1.0. So yeah, this was the larger of the two choices. So not really sure what's going on here. .5 millimeter on the tank. And same on the fitting. So yeah, we have the same diameters. We have the same threads. Very odd. Yeah, it just doesn't want to thread on. Let's try it backwards. Yeah, look at that. So I did order the right part, and the threads on the tank aren't the problem. It's actually the threads on this nut. Seems like on this side, you know, one of the threads likely is damaged, because that is as far as it'll go. So I ordered the right part, but something's wrong. I'm not sure if it comes through or not, but you can kind of see the damage to the threads on the new nut for the replacement valve. So, you know, potentially I could find a tap to try to clean this up. You know, what's even more infuriating is that now that I took it off the valve, I can't even get it back on the valve, never mind the tank. So I did remove the nut from the bad valve thinking that would work, and actually it would have, except for the fact I put a crack in it. So yeah, we're kind of dead in the water, unfortunately, for the time being. All right, so I just ordered up another new valve. It'll be here in a few days. So I'm thinking let's swap out this ATF fluid. You know, I actually pre-ordered some Type F before discovering we had a problem up here with the plug. So I'm going to try to not extract that plug. You know, my concern is, you know, if I disturb it, it might break apart, the pieces fall in, and then we have a whole other problem to deal with. But I believe I can fill it from the check bolt hole. You know, it's big enough, I think, to get some fluid in that way. So I'm going to pull the plug, we'll drain things out, and then we'll fill it hopefully through here. I mean, worst case, we can go in that way, but I'd like to avoid it if I can. And that drain bolt wasn't even that tight. So it's gonna probably make a mess and take a while, but we'll get it filled. And I think we're full. Let's try to clean this chrome up a little bit. It's in pretty good shape, and you can tell already just a little bit of steel wool in WD-40 shining this up really nice. Yeah, look at that. So I'm going to do this to all the chrome. See how nice we can get it. So we do have a couple stains here on the tank. I'll try a little bit of this adhesive remover. Works great on plastic and usually safe for paint, but not always. But it did take that stain out. The paint looks fine, so let's keep going. Yeah, it's amazing. A few minutes of cleaning, some WD-40, steel wool, and a microfiber towel. And this thing's cleaning up really well. You know, the stain is gone from the tank, seat is in perfect condition, and the pipe has a nice shine to it. So yeah, definitely stored well, you know, over its 40-year slumber. But one thing I'm curious about while cleaning, you know, I discovered we do have a little compartment here. So let's open that up, see if there's any treasure in there from the late 70s or the early 80s. You can tell this has not been off in a long time, if ever. And we do have something in there. Looks like we have maybe the original toolkit. Yeah. Very nice. So we have a wrench. It looks like maybe a 12 and a 14 millimeter. I think this one is probably a 10 and an 8. And we also have spark plug tool, smaller wrench, and it looks like a screwdriver. So yeah, pretty cool that this is still with the bike. I guess the one thing though is that to get access to the tools, you need a tool. So that's not too helpful if you're broken down on the side of the road. But we also have a piece of paper in here as well. So let's see what that is. Okay, just an envelope. That's empty. So I'm not sure what was in there. You know, potentially the key. You know, this does have a lock on the handlebar. I haven't seen the key though, so that may no longer be with the bike. So let's get this back in here and get it secured for the next 4 decades. And I think we're done in here, so it should be safe, I think, to get the side covers back on. Well, it's a few days later, and I'm still waiting on the new valve. You know, that is still a few days away. But I also ordered an M16 1.0 tap, and that arrived today. And I just started threading it on the cross-threaded nut on the first new valve we got. So let's finish driving this all the way through. And if we're lucky, it'll clean this up to the point where we can actually use it. Tighten that up a little bit more. it's getting more difficult here as we approach the damaged area. Yeah, it's definitely taking off a fair bit of metal, so hopefully I got the tap started the right way. I also think the tolerance was super tight on these threads. That's part of the reason why it wouldn't thread in. So yeah, hopefully this fixed it. It's spinning quite a bit better now. And I don't know if you can see it, but it took a lot of metal to get it to clean up. You can see all the metal shavings. So yeah, potentially I made it worse, but it's surprising actually that it took off so much material. But then again, this wouldn't thread on. So let's try threading it on back to the fuel valve. Then we'll try the bike. So the threads do look a lot better. So what do you suppose the odds are of getting these two to thread together? I don't know for sure if these threads are any good, although the nut did come installed on the valve when I got it. And I must have spent at least an hour trying to get it to thread back on unsuccessfully. So yeah, it looks like we're not off to a good start trying to get this to thread in place. Yeah, it's definitely not wanting to go. So yeah, I'm going to spend a little time. Hopefully we can get this piece threaded on. And I suspect getting this on the bike won't be an issue because those threads are actually good quality. Yeah, goes right on. So yeah, I'm going to spend a little more time on the valve side, see if we can get that to start. Because if we can, then I think we'll be in business. Well, it's a few days later, and we finally have the nut installed on the valve. So not an easy task. I spent another hour that day trying to thread it on, and it just wouldn't go. So I ended up ordering a die and had to run the actual valve through it to clean those threads up. But now that they are, everything is together more or less. We just need to screw it onto the tank, which brings us to the next potential problem. This little O-ring is what came with this valve, and it's actually just a hard piece of plastic, and I give it a very small chance of sealing. So I'm actually going to reuse the 47-year-old rubber seal, which is actually still pliable, and I would say in better shape, or at least has a better chance of sealing than that little plastic ring. So let's get this on the tank, fuel it up, see if the valve works. All right, let's test the valve real quick. The fuel line, it is still disconnected, but the valve is off, so theoretically it shouldn't leak. Well, so far so good. We don't have any leaks. So let's test the valve, make sure it works. So that is the normal position where it's taking fuel further up in the tank. And I didn't add that much fuel, so I'm kind of surprised actually that it's working, but at least we have enough, and reserve also works. So good. Let's get the fuel line connected, go for a ride. Alright, so we'll turn the fuel on, and I'm going to start actually just by going down the driveway using gravity assist here. And as soon as we're on the road, we'll get the engine started. Now this does not go very fast. I think the top speed's about 25, maybe 30 if you're going down a hill or with the wind. You know, the engine's only a 50cc engine. So I'm not going to take it on the main roads. Now let's try starting it. There we go. Wow, it has gears. I didn't know it had gears. That would explain the transmission fluid. I guess I just thought it was a clutch. So we're going 20. About 25. Brakes work good. And we'll let this car go by. I'm going to turn around. And we're going to try some hills. This is a nice flat piece of road right here. That's going to change. We just shifted into second. Going 25. Speedometer is almost maxed out, which is kind of funny. Alright, now we're starting to go up a hill, and it's going to be like this wet for a while. This hill is actually brutal on a bicycle, so I didn't think this would have any chance, but it's actually doing it right now in second gear, and I'm not even maxed out on the throttle. Well, I'm not sure what this truck's doing. We are losing speed, but we're gaining it back. Not bad. Definitely beats pedaling. Alright, we're at the top of the hill, and we're actually going to be going downhill soon, so let's see if we can hit 30. Yeah, we're at 30. Gotta slow down because the road ends up here. And we're still going downhill. The brakes work good. Just shifted into second going up the hill, so not great, but it has enough power to do it. now we're going to get to test the brakes because this road has a big downhill. Second gear. All right, took a little detour, visited a neighbor who's big into engines and motorcycles, dirt bikes. He had never seen anything like this before. And you don't see them really anymore. You know, I don't think they make new mopeds with pedals. You know, everything is e-bikes or, you know, mopeds like the type you just sit on. You don't pedal. So I think the big thing on these were that, at least back in the day, with the pedals, you didn't have to register it, you didn't have to have a license, and it was great. But not so much anymore. This actually does require a registration where I'm at, which I don't have, and the owner, not even sure if he has the title, because that was something that you didn't have to worry about back in 1979. Anyway, this is the big hill here, so brakes, they're holding up. Second gear. All right, let's do one more back and forth here. Top speed right there, just about 30. Not sure I believe that gauge, but we are reaching the top speed, I would say for sure, that this little engine can do. Bad. All right, guys, and that is pretty much a wrap. You know, this 1979 Puch Magnum is back up and running again, and running pretty much flawlessly. I would say as good as new. That said, though, there was one complaint. The seat was a little bit uncomfortable at times, and I couldn't quite figure out why. But now that I'm off the bike, I can see what the problem was. I left the gas cap on the seat, and I was sitting on it the entire ride. So now that that's fixed, we are 100%, and I think this thing will be good for many years to come with a bit of care. So, I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.